unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Andy Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. And as always, we have a fabulous show for you today. But today is an extra special show for you. And if you haven't been following the news, you will find out very shortly. But first, let me introduce my co-host, who happens to be live in London. And it's 3 a.m. in London right now. Johnny Webb, it's nice to hear from you.
Good evening, Dr. J. That's right. It's late here in the morning. But I understand you have a UFO that's been seen in England today, and you have some information on that.
I'm actually glad you brought that up. That's right. I do have 3 pieces of UFO news for everybody. This came out of the Inquisitor. A Marvin Gaye impersonator photographs a UFO fleet over Birmingham, UK. I thought that was really fascinating. So that is the UK news. Now, more locally, North Carolina witnessed mesmerized by a low-flying cigar UFO. That came out of Open Minds, and also out of Open Minds, this was a little crazy, the CB alerts Texas truck driver to multiple hovering UFOs over the I-10. I thought that was really, really fascinating as well. All the UFO news are submitted by you, the listeners. I do appreciate them. Keep them coming. As you know, all you have to do is go to the website. Now let's talk about our guest. You've had one amazing, famous Greek here in the past, and that was former presidential candidate Michael Dukakis. And now we have yet another one who happens to be the star of Ancient Aliens as well as In Search of Aliens, publisher of Legendary Times, and is the headliner for Contact in the Desert. And that happens to be Mr. Giorgio Tsoukalos. Giorgio, welcome to the show.
Dr. J, thank you very much for having me. True pleasure to be on.
It's honestly a pleasure to have you on. We've been talking about this for quite some time. A lot of your colleagues have been on, and Ancient Aliens is something that's been interesting me from a very long time, from the moment I read the Bible. That was the first inclination I had that, wait a minute, does our God really need to fly in a chariot or use sounds to blow walls or anything along those lines? And that's what literally triggered my memory or my curiosity. So I want to ask you, how did you go down this path of, essentially being the star of Ancient Aliens and everything you've done leading up to today? What was your inspiration?
Well, I had a similar experience that I too read, the Bible at a young age and was wondering. But what was even more interesting is that despite a very Catholic, Greek Orthodox upbringing, I still grew up in a very open-minded household, and especially my grandmother, she actually read Eric von Däniken to me and Edgar Cayce when I was, 6, 7 years old as bedtime stories. So these were, this was something that was dinner table conversation in our house. And as I grew older, in my teenage years, I picked up an Eric von Däniken book, and I was like, man, this is very interesting, because I hadn't read about it in a while. And so when I picked it up again as a teenager, I was hooked again right away. And, here we are. I don't have a degree in archaeology. I never claimed to have had a degree. I essentially, growing up, went to Eric von Däniken's lectures in Switzerland and in Germany. And then a time came when the American Society of the Ancient Astronaut Society ceased to exist, and Eric von Däniken and we decided that I will continue or start a new organization with the magazine Legendary Times, and that's how Prometheus, the production company for Ancient Aliens, found me, through my magazine Legendary Times, which is all about the possibility that extraterrestrials visited Earth in the remote past.
We usually don't take callers to hour 2, but we've already received one, and I'm going to go ahead and, rather than having him sit in the back, area code 337. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
My name is April.
April, do you have a question for Mr. Tsoukalos?
Yes. I was actually curious because I've just recently started reading about it. But I was wondering if he had already found the connections, like the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, that the paintings, what they have wrote on the walls, matches our nervous system, the three primary colors, blue, red, and yellow, and it shows the neurons in our brain. It's a perfect pattern. It's better than Michelangelo in the 16th Chapel. Does he already know all that yet?
No, I've not heard of this, and that's very interesting. I shall definitely check that out.
Yeah, the three systems, the blue, the red, and the yellow or gold, I call them our three wires. And the Romans and the Egyptians, when they would, I guess like their coronation, what it is your red and your blue wires, they connect because the three primary colors, when there are positive additives, it creates purple. And then you have the subtractive negatives, and that increases your mental stimulation, and you pump your brain at a higher frequency. And we use more of the brain, and that's why they drew some of the pictures of the elongated skulls. But I'm not saying that
Okay, sure, yeah.
One didn't exist, but it stimulates extra growth.
April, by all means,
very interesting.
Yes, please send us this information via website, Dr. J Radio Live, and we will post it out there for everyone to see. And thank you very much for calling. And all you other callers, by all means, you could send tweets, or you could go into the chat room, or by all means, call in hour 2 for more questions. Now, speaking of the past and in their ancient history, I've heard a lot of people talk about the double tetrahedron that appears in a lot of these structures. I know this is sort of deviating from the inspiration question, but since April brought that up, I was wondering, do you know anything about that?
Well, what I find fascinating is that there are actually some artifacts that have been found in Ireland and in Scotland that are multifaceted structures, little stones that have been addressed in that shape, and some have actually determined to be made of iron. So very interesting stuff. So I think that there is something to be said about geometric structures that have been found throughout history, and who knows what they signify. I mean, I always think that all of these structures, they should be deciphered by mathematicians. And so recently I spoke with an astrophysicist, and he's very much interested in not an astrophysicist, but a plasma physicist, and he's very interested in crop circles. And, to me, if somebody is all of a sudden interested in crop circles and trying to decipher those possibly mathematical messages, then I think it's fascinating to go down that route of trying to explore, are there any messages behind all of these different things?
I'm actually really glad you brought up crop circles, because that relates to something that I'd been meaning to ask you, which is modern UFOs or modern extraterrestrial phenomenon. A lot of people believe that we have either not been visited, or others believe that there was an advanced race that lived here on Earth and died off. And then still others, such as Eric von Däniken, when we talked to him last, he said that there was an ancient culture here, extraterrestrials, flesh and blood extraterrestrials, but they left and they have yet to return. Do you think that they've always been here in the sense that they've always been visiting us, or have they left and returned recently, or what's your stance on that?
Well, here's the thing. So I completely agree that we have been visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past. They're the stories of these gods, ancient astronauts, and when we talk about gods, or when I talk about gods, it should always be with a lowercase g. It has nothing to do with the spirit of creation or the almighty force of the universe or anything like that. It's just that our ancestors misunderstood flesh and blood beings as gods, as divine messengers, which they never were. So the idea basically is that the basic premise of the ancient astronaut theory is that at some point there's no question that in our history we can see that, in our evolutionary history we can see that evolution happened because of the fossil record. So there is no question that evolution to some extent happened. But as all geneticists or many geneticists will agree, at some point something very bizarre happened that can't necessarily be explained away with coincidence alone. That right there is where the ancient astronaut theory suggests that a deliberate change in our genetic makeup took place, which means that we are, in a sense, even though we have, we have partly evolved on planet Earth, evolutionary speaking, but also we have extraterrestrial genes within us, so we already are hybrids. Now, if we are the product of such an extraterrestrial species, then I don't think that they would just abandon us in that sense. They would basically, as we can read in the ancient texts, they gave us the knowledge. I mean, they gave us knowledge. They gave us, so-called intelligence, to the basic tools with which to achieve what we've developed into who we are today. And so I think that if somebody does that, then you don't necessarily abandon your creation or your quote-unquote offspring just like that. So I think that, yes, they might have disappeared. Let's say if there were 100 here or 1,000, then let's say 950 returned or left, but 50 remained, because I think that the reason why they were called the Watchers in the ancient past is deliberate. They're here to observe us. They're here to watch us. And so I think that we have been watched for thousands of years, and this continues to this day, and this has transformed into the modern day UFO phenomenon, because there is definitely something to be said that there's something there that we cannot explain. And whether we think that it's extraterrestrial or it's our modern technology or something like that, that's whatever. It's just a question mark.
The ancient Indian text, I'm going to mess up the name if I say it, talks about an event which a lot of people describe as a nuclear bomb going off, where it was the equivalent of 10,000 suns shining that bright, people literally being, I don't want to say liquefied, but burned to death.
Yep.
What's the name of that text? I really don't want to mess it up. It begins with a B.
Well, it's a part of the Mahabharata. It's the Drona Parva.
Yes.
It's an ancient Indian epic, and what it describes is, and all the ancient Indian epics, they read like modern day science fiction, because they speak of flying chariots that were able to fly through the sky with weapons and arrows of glowing fire that rained down upon the enemy and things like that. And so there is a professor of linguistics, Professor Dilip Kanjilal. He wrote a book called the Ancient Weapons in Ancient India, and it's truly amazing. And yes, there's this portion, there's one passage that talks about this weapon being unleashed that was brighter than 10 or 100 suns that were up in the sky, and the elephants were so afraid they started to run and just leave everybody behind. And after this explosion, the entire land became very, very quiet. And afterwards, people started to lose their hair, and they started to lose their nails, and had boils on their arms and legs. Now, this is something that is a perfect description of radiation fallout. But this story is, very, very, very old. I mean, thousands of years old. And even if, because some have suggested that the basis for that story comes from dubious sources, that it might be channeled or something like that, which even the channeled information goes back 250 years, which is before what we knew about nuclear power.
I have a written question here. I'm just going to read it directly, and hopefully it'll go in line. It says, what do you think of the idea that ISIS/ISIL are destroying ancient sites because the U.S. knows that soon the ancient sites /stargates are due to reopen soon, and they are going to cover it up as soon as possible to
Personally,
declare disclosure?
I think it's complete hogwash. I mean, that's complete nonsense. I think ISIS, they are completely insane, and they are not operating under anybody's agenda. They're just completely insane, because nobody in their right mind would go and destroy, ancient cities like Palmyra, or as they did a few months ago, Nineveh. I mean, Nineveh, it's one of the earliest cities on planet Earth. My heart is still broken. And, this is something where they destroyed their own heritage. So, this is not anything that, in my opinion, is orchestrated. This is 100% barbaric, nothing else. I mean, it's because they're destroying their own heritage. It's not even has nothing to do with Islam or not Islam, even though that's the argument that these are the works of people from before Islam, because those structures are from 2000, 3000 BC, so crazy old. So I mean, we're not talking about people with that can be reasoned with. I mean, they're animals.
They definitely are, and I give the similar idea of that. If we're Greek, obviously, and if no matter how mad we got at our fellow Greeks or anybody, no Greek in their right mind would go and destroy the Acropolis or anything in that matter.
My gosh, no, and that's the thing, I mean, well, I would have to say never, because with everything that's going on in Greece right now, I mean, it's horrific what's going on in Europe right now, with not just with Greece, but Europe is falling apart with the whole Euro debacle. So, I mean, but yeah, I agree. It might be a bit less dangerous, but at the same time, never say never.
That's true. We can't, because I've seen things that sounded strange in the past, sure enough, happened, and we can't
Right.
curse them in that term. Now, speaking of Greece, we both have Greek heritage. Obviously, you were born in Switzerland. I was born here, but first generation. All my life, I mean, before I learned to speak English, I've been fed with, happily, mythology, every
course.
single story over and over, just to make sure
Yes.
it's ingrained in my brain. And I've always, realized that they couldn't have just made this up. So whenever my father and mother and Papu and my aunt and uncle talked about mythology, in my mind, I was like, how could it be mythology? It's not myth. It seems to me that they're just describing things that they can, in words that they understand. Exactly something you said. Now, being part of Greek yourself, I'm sure you've taken a look at all the ancient Greek lore and all the Greek sites. What cities or what areas and structures of Greece stood out to you the most to have a link with the ancient alien phenomena?
Well, that isn't necessarily a structure, but like you were saying, all of Greek mythology is 100% placed in ancient astronaut lore, because that's the thing that I find so fascinating when people talk about, the critics talk about, the ancient astronaut theory suggests that, people in Africa and South America, they were dumb, and so they had to have help from ETs to build their structures. Well, nobody said that, because guess what? Greece is in the heart of Europe. So the entire Greek pantheon of gods consists of extraterrestrial beings that over time were turned into gods. Or in fact, let me put it this way. If and when, let's say 1,000 years from now, or if we're good 500 years from now, we'll master a way with which to go from this planet to another planet. And it is not something that we will do with exotic technology, but rather simple. If you have like a wheel that's spinning on its own axis, creating artificial gravity, if you go out with one of those, they're called generation starships. They turn their own axis, they create their own gravity, and the reason why it's called a generation starship is because everyone procreates on the starship, and then the 20th or even the 30th or whatever generation arrives at the destination. So it can be done to go from star to star. Now, once we arrive, and of course we'll not just roll the dice by going to a star or to a system, we'll go somewhere where we think there might be intelligent life. So once we determine that there is life, we'll go there and we'll see, okay, this life has potential to be, incredibly intelligent, but they're, technologically speaking, they're still primitive. So what will we do? Will we just stand back, or will we actually interfere with their evolution? And will we teach them a few things? And of course, the answer is we will teach them a few things. So how will we make contact with them? Of course, first we'll observe them. We'll not, because, the prime directive is only in Star Trek. It's not a real thing. So ultimately, we will break the prime directive protocol, and we will make contact with them after observing them. How will we do this? We will descend from the sky. So what does that make us immediately? It'll make us gods. But both, all of us, the listeners, you and me, we know we are no gods. We're ordinary, quote-unquote, ordinary space travelers. And this is exactly what happened in our past. And our ancestors thought, not because that they were intellectually primitive, but because they were technologically primitive. They didn't understand what was going on in front of their very eyes. And that's why we have those different mythologies and religions today.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, especially when there's nothing that flies except what you throw, such as a discus or a bird. When you see a giant metallic anything, you're going to use your own words. So no wonder why they call it a chariot, or as Ezekiel calls it, a wheel within a wheel.
Right. They're using Alexander the Great called them the glowing flying shields and things like that. What I find fascinating is, and I'm sure you're familiar, and all of our listeners are familiar with that little gold pre-Columbian gold flyer pin. It looks like a modern day airplane, but it's an ancient funerary object. A lot of archaeologists, they say, well, these are nothing else but depictions of birds, fish, frogs, or some type of insects. Well, what they don't tell you is that there's no question that culture did produce thousands of objects that did look like fish, frogs, insects, and birds and things like that. But if you put side by side those artifacts that are actually representing fish or birds, and then you put that next to those things that look like airplanes, it's not even the same category. And so, nobody's playing with open cards here. Nobody's making these comparisons. And so we have to start making the comparisons and say, okay, is this what you're talking about here? Well, if you put it side by side, it's not even close. But nobody talks about these things. So that's what we're here for.
One of the episodes on Ancient Aliens, that famous gold that we were just talking about, that looks like a space shuttle from Egypt, that model, you built a replica of it a little bit bigger and added a propeller, and sure enough, it flew.
Well, it wasn't me.
Your crew. Your crew.
Colleagues, yes.
But that blew my mind, because it was built exactly, the same shape, everything to the details, like I said, other than the propeller, and it was very aerodynamic. So my question is this is pure speculation. Do you think that they had a glimpse into the future, possibly in what we were using, or do you think this is possibly something that the visitors may have been flying in? Or what do you think was the inspiration for that, as well as the submarine-looking hieroglyph?
Sure. Okay, so I personally do not think that was a glimpse into the future, because, and this is to briefly, and then you might have to remind me of the question again, because I might forget to go off into a tangent here. But the reason why I don't think it's them having had a glimpse into the future is answered by the same answer that I give when people ask me, do you think that the ancient astronauts that are described in our ancient texts as the gods are actually us time traveling from the future into our past, trying to teach us stuff? It's us from the future. We are the ancient astronauts. And, it's a very legitimate and a very interesting question, and a question that I've actually not only received for, almost 20 years now, but at the same time, I've really contemplated the question. And I have to honestly answer that I do not think that the stories of the ancient astronauts are us from the future, because I'm very familiar with what many of the ancient texts are saying. And so far, and this is why I'm saying this, because if somebody out there listening has a text reference that is appropriate, then please let me know. Because what I'm looking for is a text reference that says, it's us, we're from the future, we're helping you. But the gods, or those beings that came in the past, they only said, we come from out there. We come from the dark and distant, from the stars. We come from the heavens. They never said, we are you from the future. So that is why I think that the whole idea that ancient astronauts are time travelers, that it's us from the future, that is how I basically, look at the argument as, not valid.
And then, of course, we also have the grandfather paradox. If there was time travelers from the future coming back, altering the history, wouldn't that alter everything now? And then secondly, you're right. They reference the stars, especially when they built structures aligned with stars they couldn't even see.
Right,
such as Sirius.
Exactly. And also, but there was something else to this question that
the submarine hieroglyph.
Oh, the submarine, right. Okay, so now you're referring to a lintel stone that's at Abydos in Dendera in Egypt. No, it is at Abydos. And it's this carving of what looks like to be a helicopter, a plane, and some type of a submarine or something like that, or a tank. Some people say it looks like a tank. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. So in 2006, I actually published about this in Legendary Times, and to this day I get flack for it. And it's actually quite all right, because I think it's very important to point out these things. It turns out that we're actually not looking at a helicopter. We're not looking at a tank. We're not looking at a UFO or a submarine. But what actually happened is when the son of the pharaoh, it was Ramses and Seti, or Seti and Ramses, when his son came to power, he walked through all the different temples and structures that his father had created, and he saw some of the inscriptions and said, okay, here I'd like to have a change made, and there I'd like to have a change made. And so what happened was that his artisans then had to carve new hieroglyphics on top of old hieroglyphics, thus chipping away at other older hieroglyphics and making it look like a helicopter as a result, because they're superimposed images. In Egyptology, they call that and you can actually look this up on Google, it's called a palimpsest. A palimpsest is when two symbols are carved on top of each other, and they make it look, as a result, make it look like something completely else. So I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but that's the truth. And I think it's fantastic to be able to say that is how it is, because if you eliminate one piece of the evidence from a theory, from an idea, that doesn't mean that the entire theory all of a sudden becomes null and void. On the contrary, I think it makes it even stronger.
Agreed. Before I ask you my next question, I have another written question here from Peggy from Utah. It says here, has Giorgio seen a UFO?
Yes, I have. In fact, up until about a year ago, I would have not answered this question the affirmative, because back in 2005, I went to a night vision thing with my friend, just to use his first name, Ross, in San Francisco. We were up to Sonoma to see Ed Grimsley. And it was one of those night vision things with, the night vision evenings with the night vision goggles. And what Ross and myself, Ed Grimsley, and 3 other guys saw that night was truly spectacular. I mean, really, straight up into the sky, and really bizarre stuff. I mean, I never thought that, night vision goggles are that significant, but they truly are. And this was in 2005. Now, fast forward to August of 2014. And this is in Joshua Tree, out in the desert here in California, on August 8th, or on the 9th, on the night of August 7th or August 8th. It was either Thursday night or Friday night. We were out in the desert, at Contact in the Desert, and Ed Grimsley was there with his RV, handing out his night vision goggles, same guy that Ross and I saw those weird things back in 2005. And he was handing out the glasses, and there were about 28 other people with us. So it wasn't just me and 2 or 3 other people. There was a bunch of us. And as the night wound down and they started to collect the night vision goggles, a really tall kid all of a sudden points at the Big Dipper and he says, what are those 2 stars doing inside the Big Dipper? And of course, everybody looked towards the Big Dipper, and sure enough, there were 2 bright stars inside the Big Dipper. And Ed Grimsley starts to hand out the glasses again. We all have our eyes trained at this formation or at these stars, and the great thing was that you didn't need necessarily the night vision goggles. You could see it with the naked eye. And after about 10 minutes of observation, all of a sudden, those 2 stars that were inside the Big Dipper started to move up into the stars, equidistant from each other. I mean, without moving from one another, but moving up into the stars and just, disappearing. Now, I would not be telling you this in a straight line, of course, that too. I would not be telling you this if there weren't 28 other people that saw it with me. Were you there? I know you were at that conference. Were you there? Were you there that night?
Joshua Tree 2 years ago and last year? You're talking about?
No, last year. Yeah,
absolutely. I was there. Yes, I was. I was absolutely.
I know, but were you there at the night vision thing with Ed Grimsley?
Yes, I was, which happened on the. I don't want to say where the tent city was, but the you know what I'm talking about. Behind not the outside amphitheater, but above where there was a ledge and there was the night vision.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yes. So you were there. You saw that?
I was, and I was hoping I could catch it on camera, but I couldn't.
Yeah, no. So and the next day, and at the panel. That was the first time that I had to say I saw UFO, because the people that I was with, I mean, we were all very much sober, and it was insane. It was insane.
And I'm glad you're able to talk about this now openly. And this brings me to the question I had before the written question came. Now, when there was the first of all, going back to History Channel, there was the UFO Hunter series, which didn't do very well, was shut down. Then they had these one-offs, British Roswell, China Roswell, then Majestic 12, and then they labeled it as the series UFO Files, which still continue to do well, but there aren't new ones. Ancient Aliens, there was a one-off, as you recall, obviously, because you've been a part of all of them, that had the famous debunkers in there. Michael Shermer talking about the Baghdad Battery. When you talked about it, when the series talked about it, he was like, well, so what? It has 4 volts of electricity, so what? But yet, when this turned into a series, there were, I believe, 6 parts for season 1, and then there's been, I think, over 100 plus episodes to date.
Yes.
You don't have any more debunkers, which shows to me that the acceptance from everybody out there watching has drastically increased. And in order to have so many seasons, people are still watching, which shows 2 things. One, the debunkers are sort of laying off, and the networks aren't putting them on as much because they were probably doing more harm than good. And 2, far more people are open to this idea than they were 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. Would you agree?
Well, and also what we have to think about, or what we have to be aware, and this is true, is that of all the quote unquote mainstream scientists that we have on Ancient Aliens, like Michael Dennon. I mean, he's a great friend of ours. He's open-minded, and I can guarantee you that each time that you see a professor on Ancient Aliens, or a scientist that speaks on Ancient Aliens, we did not hold a gun to their head to appear on the show. They're all doing this voluntarily, So it's not like, and so the idea that we now have, mainstream scientists talking about, aliens and the idea of extraterrestrial life or technologies and rediscovery of this technologies like, the invisible cloak and things like that they're working on right now, that's really cool stuff. And I think that, in the 60s, the biggest taboo topic that scientists and especially astrophysicists were able to talk about was whether or not we're alone in the universe. And there were more people or more scientists actually questioning whether or not we're alone, as in, no, there's no way there's somebody else out there. We're the only ones. Today, this is in the 1960s, today you'd be very hard-pressed to find any scientist to say, or astrophysicist to say, that we are alone in the universe. It's a given that we're not alone. But the big taboo topic today, even though everybody is pussyfooting around it, is, all right, I guess we know that we're not alone, but, I guess they could have never come here. Well, why? Because we can't travel from star to star currently. That means that a society or a civilization that's, let's say, only 5,000 years older than us, that they can't do it either. I mean, that's the height of human arrogance, as Michio Kaku would say. That to suggest that because we can't do it, somebody else can't do it either. I never understood that type of thinking.
Exactly. The world is flat, right? It has to be flat. People fly? No way. Someone flying to the moon and stepping on it? Science fiction. Right?
There is a Facebook page dedicated to the flat Earth theories. There are people to this day believing that we live on a flat Earth. I just read about this yesterday. It's insane. It's insane.
That is truly insane, because when you have new data, you have to rewrite what you already know. And that's why people call it theory as opposed to a fact. That's all it is a theory. You use the best available information to you and you create an idea of what led to it. When it becomes fact, then obviously it's fact. So
a theory in modern day science is fact. A hypothesis. That's right. A hypothesis is something that's not accepted yet as fact. But a theory, I mean, that's considered as established science.
Johnny's got a question in the UK. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, hi there. Egypt's head of antiquities, Dr. Azar Hawis, recently got upset with author Graham Hancock on his theories and refused to listen and debate with him about Gobekli Tepe. Mm-hmm. And I believe it wanted to associate Egypt, but not the pyramids, but the actual water line around the Sphinx, and bring that closer to the 11,600 years BC, which is what he believes Gobekli Tepe is. And I found it quite strange that the head of Antiquities didn't know anything about Gobekli Tepe at that point and refused to debate it as if everything's closed. As someone who's investigating ancient aliens and obviously antiquities, how have you found the public domain and the way that governments and higher bodies put a close on things? What's your personal take on that?
Well, personally, I have no. There's never been any time when we've submitted a cut of the show and we would receive a note back from the network saying, "Hey, you can't show this. It's too dangerous." This has not happened. So the idea that there are things that we can talk about and that we can't talk about, that sounds very sinister. And if you think about it, all these conspiracy theories, I mean, it's all about, everything is just sinister, and not everything is sinister. I mean, we would live in such an awful place if that were the case. I mean, it would just be awful. So the fact that Zahi Hawass did not even want to discuss, have an open discussion, it wasn't even long. I think they agreed to 45 minutes or to 35 minutes, a very short time, that he wouldn't even, give Graham the respect of participating and just blowing up beforehand and just leaving before the event even or the discussion even takes place, that to me is not scientific. It actually shows defeat because I know Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval personally. They're good friends of mine, and I know them as people, and I know that their research is genuine. And even if you could give, in Robert Bauval's case, if you could give one example how his theory pans out to be correct, that's not the case. You can give 50 different examples that all yield the same result. Well, that is not coincidence. So if you want, or not you, but if anybody wants to subscribe that 50 examples or 50 calculations all yield the same result, that is coincidence, well, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do, man. It's over. So if that's what they want to believe in, so be it. You can tell them on a blue sky, on a blue day in the sky, that it's blue sky, and they will say, no, actually it's gray. That's the type of people that we're dealing with.
Closed-minded, and then that's the sad part. People need to be open-minded. I have far more questions to ask you. I'm sure we'll definitely run out of time, but I have a written listener question. Some give names, some don't. This is from David Cole, Baltimore, Maryland. Does he think any one or two pieces of evidence are smoking guns as proof of ancient visitations? Obviously, he meaning you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and my heart is in Baltimore. I hope everything is going well again. I think that from an engineering and from a rock cutting perspective, it would have to be the ancient site of Pumapunku in Bolivia, which is a part of a larger temple complex of Tiwanaku in the highlands of the Andes at an altitude of almost 13,000 feet. So we're incredibly high up there. There are a ton of sandstone blocks up there, which is a rather soft rock, so that can be cut, no question, with copper tools or metal tools and with other stone tools. But amongst this sea of red sandstone, there's also, you will also find giant rocks that are gray, and that gray rock is andesite. And andesite is igneous rock. It's incredibly hard, and they have been cut with such precision that we today would have great difficulty in replicating it. And the only way that we today could replicate it is if we were to use, high-powered water jets or, diamond saws or diamond drills and, milling equipment and things like that. So that's number one. And then the other thing is more of a comprehensive collection of texts from around the world of beings descending from the sky in shining orbs, or in shiny eggs, or they come out, they land in giant turtles and things like that. So it's all these stories of these beings descending from the sky, which in my opinion are nothing else but description of encounters of the first kind.
Exactly as you mentioned, them describing them in words they knew. Like you said,
Yes.
A flying turtle shell. That is typical what we would describe now as a dome-shaped saucer. Now, I'm going to go back to something we touched on that I think is a very important topic, since it was really overlooked, as Johnny from London talked about, by the director of the ancient structures, or the I forget the classics department. Regardless, the Dr.
Zai Hawass, yes,
him,
yes.
The Gobekli Tepe.
Gobekli Tepe, which
Yes.
is in Turkey, yes.
Yes, the significance of that, because it is far older than what we previously thought to be the first civilization, the Sumerian civilization. What are your thoughts about that when you first heard about it?
Well, it will not be the last ruin that will be older than what our textbooks or our school books are writing or are teaching us. it's the same with our fossil records too. I mean, every year or every other year we find a new pre-human, like when we found Homo floresiensis in Java, the Hobbit people. I mean, what is this? I mean, they have been deemed legitimate. So what's going on here? So, the idea that Gobekli Tepe is 15,000 years old, well, I've got news for you. There are people that have determined that Pumapunku or Tiwanaku may be 28,000 years old. And these are all wild numbers, but if you read them correctly, or if you calculate them the way they were meant to be, then we are arriving at numbers like 15,000 years ago or 28,000 years ago. But some modern-day archaeologists are now saying, oh, our ancestors didn't quite know how to calculate properly, so instead of solar years, they used lunar years, and they made mistakes here and they made mistakes there, and at some point they also were drunk, so they didn't know what they were doing. So, and apparently I'm the one who's insulting our ancestors. I don't think so.
I would agree with you and disagree with everybody else that we can't be insulting them. As a matter of fact, what are they going to say? Every single person was drunk, or every single person was eating peyote or whatever the local drug was at the time that made them hallucinate? It just doesn't make sense. There's just way too many people and way too many structures. And one thing I like that you talked about earlier is some of these structures are built in such ways and that are so precise that we can't even replicate them. Some of them so large we can't even lift them.
Well, actually we can, but what we would do is we would use the most sophisticated in heavy machinery. We can cut stone at like andesite in Pumapunku. We can do that stuff, but we would use high-tech machinery, and therein lies the difference. So, David Childers always used to say that, it had to have been easy. To me, it looks as if some of those rocks, they had the capability of melting or softening the stone, and then they were able to mold them or pour the stone into a prefabricated mold, and then the stone over time would harden again, and so it would be placed, in place when it was hard again. So, because once, or if you ever have been there, you can touch the surface of some of those rocks, and some of it is like glass, like a bathroom mirror. So the precision is unbelievable. I mean, there's this one rock with a groove that's equidistant. It's perfect. That goes down. It has holes in it that are equidistant in depth, and it's an andesite. And you can't do that with chicken bones or with copper tools. It's not even wishful thinking. It's pure physics.
Speaking of the numbers, some people, Zecharia Sitchin, for example, talks about the fact that the Anunnaki, according to his translation, is that they came back, or that they were here and created us, essentially, like you were talking about, took what was here, Homo erectus or Neanderthal, mixed it with extraterrestrial DNA and created the modern day Homo sapien, and he dates it as far back as 250,000 years. Did you find any link to things going back as far as that, as far as the ancient structures that you've looked at?
Not necessarily ancient structures, but if I may say a word about the whole Zecharia Sitchin idea, I agree with his notion, especially how far back he actually goes. But I disagree with his idea that we were created as slaves, or that somehow we are still slaves to this day. It might be possible, perhaps, that at some point that a worker force was needed, whatever. But I disagree with that. I think that the extraterrestrials were here. They saw that there was potential amongst mankind and wanted to see where it leads. Because the idea that they came here to mine for gold is unfortunately uncalled for, because providing that such a thing as the Big Bang happened, which can be questioned. If the Big Bang happened, that would mean that every celestial body throughout the universe, on average, has the same amount of gold or any of the elements within its body. So the Anunnaki, whoever they may have been, they didn't need to come to Earth to mine for gold. They could have, remained in their own solar system or wherever they're from, to look for gold. So, therefore, I have a bit of a hard time agreeing with the whole idea that they came here for gold, because, you can go to the moon, you can go to Mars, you can go to anywhere and mine for gold. You don't have to come to Earth. So, I think it was way more of an intergalactic Peace Corps type of an idea instead of, the sinister, humans were slaves initially concept.
There definitely is a lot of gold in other materials and other planets. We have a little over 5 minutes to break, and I have 2 more written questions, as well as Johnny's got a question in the UK. So I'm going to go ahead and let Johnny ask first. Go ahead, Johnny.
Hi there. Right. Well, the first question is do you think the magnetic pole shift is helping, or is the cause of the global consciousness awakening, a vibrational change that is happening right now around the world? That's our first question.
And then I can answer the first question right away. That's not my expertise, and I have no idea.
Okay. And the second question is, do you feel that the kids of today may see your show on the History Channel and take it literally as real history? And where does the show differentiate between speculation and real history?
Well, that's up to the viewer. And I think that my biggest vindication will be when one day I will hear that a young kid watching Ancient Aliens decided to become an archaeologist or an anthropologist, or becomes anyone specializing in any of the archaeological different subjects, and says, well, I became this because as a kid or as a teenager I watched Ancient Aliens. Because guess what? There are archaeologists watching Ancient Aliens. There are archaeologists and anthropologists even appearing on Ancient Aliens. So I think there totally is a paradigm shift going on at the moment. And, to me, I find it absolutely flabbergasting that any archaeologist or even astrophysicist would be opposed to the idea of exploring the ancient astronaut theory, because if anything, it can only contribute to their topic of study and not take away from it.
A couple weeks ago, Jason Martell talked about cycles. I believe he said 12,600-year cycles. Can you tell us where the numbers came from?
Yes, and this is actually ancient knowledge that was not only known by the ancient Hindus, but also the ancient Greeks, and they talked about this idea of a great year. And so not only the Greeks, but also the Hindus talked about these cycles of time. We are right now in a cycle of time, but it all boils down to, or it can be summed up with the idea that this great year essentially equals precession. And precession has to do with the rotation of our Earth's axis. There's a bit of a wobble in there, and for it to reset, it takes about 28,000 years. And this is something that the Hindus knew. This is something that the ancient Greeks knew, but also the Maya. So this was ancient knowledge that seems to have been lost, but it's now being rediscovered with researchers and scientists. I mean, the great year thing is something that Walter Cruttenden is talking about in his book. I think it's called The Great Year, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Clearly, the Earth goes through changes all the time. In fact, Egypt, being as dry and arid as it is now, would not be a place you'd want to settle. But if it was a place that had a lot of rain, was able to to grow crops with no problems, I think then that would be a proper place to settle. So I don't think Egypt in its current state is what it was when it was settled. And that infers to me that the climate there has changed drastically. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, we know that the Sahara, the Sahara Desert was not a desert up until a few thousand years ago. I mean, there are fossilized palm trees in Switzerland at a glacier garden that show palm trees in Switzerland. You know, I mean, we have the Alps in Switzerland with snow. So I mean, clearly these cataclysms have happened, and they've also changed, nature. So clearly, or not clearly, but most likely, there was a time when the Nile Delta, or actually the Giza Plateau, was quite fertile.
What else near that area in northern Africa have you found that has had such anomalous structures, such as the pyramids and things that, such as the golden statue or golden model of the airplane, or anything along the lines of that?
Well, the golden model is actually from South America. It's from pre-Columbian period. The model in Egypt is the Saqqara dove. It looks like a type of a bird. But also that one, they too blew that up to a model and shot it up into the air, and it flew. So, same difference. But, in Morocco, there's a megalithic site called Lixus with giant blocks that are just strewn about, and, who knows what it was used for. I mean, the Romans discovered it, or they came upon it, but it's older.
It absolutely is. I think the fact that a lot of the mainstream archaeologists are limiting our society to what they can find, to trace it back to, and keeping such a closed mind is really a disservice to all of us. And it takes people such as yourself to really put your research out there. And thankfully, History Channel was grateful to, thankfully, to all of us, everybody out there who watches it, taking on a show like that when there was controversy regarding the subject. Thankfully, there's so many more people that believe in it. Actually, we are getting ready to take a quick break. So when we return, I have so many more questions to ask, and I'm afraid to ask one now because I know it'll carry over. So if everybody stays tuned, we'll be right back in 3 short minutes. Much more with Giorgio Tsoukalos. Welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and co-hosting with me live in London is Johnny Webb. Before we return to our all-star guest, let's talk about some quick news real quick. The most recent interviews have yet to be uploaded, so hang tight, everybody. Daniel Sheehan, John Anthony West will be uploaded, as well as Jason Martell had a glitch in it, and he will also be re-uploaded. What is uploaded is Congressman Merrill Cook from the Citizen Hearing, along with Stephen Bassett, William Henry, Michael Cremo, and the Andreasen Affair. Those are the most recent videos, as well as the large library of all the other interviews. And like I said, all 200 plus interviews will be uploaded to this new channel. All you have to remember is Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. That is the name of the website, drjradiolive.com, and every social media account from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Flickr, Tumblr, Google+, you name it. That's all you need to remember. And the winners, 22, 23, and 24, I announced them this past Tuesday. I was supposed to save some for today, but I wanted to give everybody notice. That way they have a chance to get accommodations. You can find all the information of where to stay at contactinthedesert.com. And if you want to see if you're one of the winners, and if you haven't seen the email, all you have to do is go to my website again, drjradiolive.com, and click on the Contact in the Desert winners. Again, that event is happening California in Joshua Tree, near Palm Springs, near 29 Palms. Friday, May 28th to Sunday, May 31st, with some special intensive workshops. Monday, June 1st, over 40 speakers. This is labeled as LA Weekly as the Global UFO Conference, with, of course, today's guest being the headliner, all-star speaker, and that happens to be, as we said, and as you've been hearing, Mr. Giorgio Tsoukalos. Giorgio, it's been a pleasure this past hour, and before I pick up on our questions, I wanted to ask you two things. First, if you could tell people a little bit about what you're going to be doing at Contact in the Desert, and then secondly, where can people find you, can they find Legendary Times, and what's in your future for you?
Site for Contact in the Desert is contactinthedesert.com. And I'll be giving a workshop, a 3-hour lecture, and then I'll also be appearing on a couple of panels. And there will be a dinner or a lunch, I think, with George Noory that I'll be participating in, and something that we've organized as well with Eric. And, contactinthedesert.com, I think, is the website. You can go check it out for tickets. I think there's still some available. And then personally, I'm at legendarytimesbooks.com or on my Twitter page, which is at Tsoukalos, and on my Facebook, Giorgio Tsoukalos fans. But, I'm just looking forward to this conference because, it's always great to meet everyone in person.
And you do have a lot of fans. A lot of people have been hyped up when we announced you coming to the show. And of course, when Contact in the Desert first announced their speakers, everybody was excited to know that you were back on the lineup. Now, speaking of the future, is it nine seasons so far of Ancient Aliens? Has it been?
Actually, we are airing, or the last episodes of season 7 have aired. And we are currently in production of season 8, which will air sometime in the fall of this year. And in season 8, that's when we will reach 100 episodes.
Is the reason I got 9 stuck in my head, is the season going to go on for a 9th season? Because for some reason I heard 9 seasons of Ancient Aliens. I don't know if that was 2 more to come or...
No, we're not even in season 8 yet. It's because... people are getting confused because what's happened is that sometimes due to scheduling reasons, seasons are pulled apart instead of being shown, every week a new episode. So maybe they show 4 episodes and then four repeats and then 4 episodes again. So, we just aired the last episodes of season 7. I mean, that's I'm giving you the production schedule. There's no mystique in this.
Gotcha. And I know a lot of people that have been on this show, and so many more Linda Moulton Howe, I know, is coming into town to film some. So everybody, you are in for one more hell of a season, because every season has done nothing but great things. And in fact, I love it how it is expanded to include current topics. I remember there was an episode on Civil War and so many other different things. Now I'm going to go back to the Ancient Aliens. One of the things that really struck me the most when I was a child was looking at the pyramids. First, you see the pyramids of Giza. Everybody, I think at their earliest memories, will see photographs of the Great Pyramids of Giza, and they're just ingrained in their mind. And then, of course, I started to see South American temples that were also pyramid shaped. And then you start seeing other places around this planet that had similar structures. And it always occurred to me, if we didn't learn to fly till the earliest 20th century, and of course we didn't learn to get to space until the 50s, late 50s, and yet we couldn't even have discovered supposedly the New World by Christopher Columbus until 1492, how were all these ancient sites having similar properties? And the only thing I concluded was something, the star people, as a lot of the cultures call them, were giving them wisdom as well as helping them engineer it. Was that when you went to visit all these different sites, what similarities did you catch on the same way I caught on with these pyramids?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and it's and you know, therein lies the question. You have to ask yourself either, and mind you, both scenarios are quite possible. You know, but we have to explore them from the view of modern day archaeologists, and that is either all of our, you know, our prehistoric civilizations were all in closer contact than we ever gave them credit for, because that is something that modern day archaeology says did not happen. You know, when Thor Heyerdahl proposed that the settlement of the South Pacific, that it all happened from Peru, because you can find a construction masonry style on Easter Island that is identical to the masonry style in Cusco in Peru. Well, you know, what is that? You know, we're not talking about a little bit of a similarity. No, we're talking identical, which is a 1-to-1 copy of the masonry style. You know, so either our ancestors did you know, circumnavigate the globe way earlier than we gave them credit for, or the only other remaining solution is that they were visited by the same teachers, that all these different cultures were visited by someone, and these people didn't come on boats, they came from the sky. You know, because that's another thing that we have to talk about, that they make a clear difference between when the Spanish showed up and when those other beings showed up, because the other beings, they descended from the sky in flying shields and in plumed serpents, you know, flying snakes and stuff like this. And when the Spaniards arrived, then they actually described, they were, you know, people in ships. So, you know, the powers of observation of our ancestors, it was impeccable. They knew what they were seeing, and they knew what they wrote down or what they put in their oral traditions.
There was a picture I saw of a wall in Peru that really blew my mind. It had 4 layers, each representing a different civilization, the top being the most modern, the one below that being the Spanish when they conquered it. The below that was the Incan, and of course you see how poorly constructed it was. Below that, it is so perfect that you couldn't even fit a human hair. And that really blew my mind. Do you know which structure I'm talking about, where it has the 4 layers of the wall in Peru?
Sure, absolutely. It's called Sacsayhuaman, and it's a gigantic fortification, and that is actually not the only example, because Sacsayhuaman is right outside of Cusco. Even if you go inside of Cusco, the Inca walls, well, they're actually a misnomer. Those giant megalithic walls are actually all pre-Inca. The Inca themselves say, or they told the chroniclers, that when the Inca stumbled upon the scene, all this stuff was already there. So even in mainstream archaeological circles, experts, Inca experts to this day are actually debating, or they don't know, they can't give a clear answer who the pre-Inca were, because most of the structures that we today considered Inca are in fact pre-Inca. And one way of identifying pre-Inca structures is if they are megalithic in size, meaning, blocks of stone that are, multiple tons heavy and up to, 50, 60, 100 tons. At an altitude in Tiwanaku's case of 13,000 feet, how was the stuff transported? Oh, wooden rollers. Really? Wooden rollers at an altitude of 13,000 feet? We are above the natural tree line, so no trees ever grew there for them to be, deforested and used as wooden rollers or logs. It's an impossibility. So, nobody thinks about these things, that thinks about them, but nobody questions them. Everybody says, oh, yeah, they used wooden rollers. No, they didn't. Wooden rollers did not exist up there.
Brian Forrester has been doing a lot of work with the Paracas people in Cusco, and he's been coming out with some strange skeletons and skulls, the Hawaii skeleton and stuff like that. What do you make of that? Are they human or are they alien? What's your take on that, Giorgio?
Look, there is absolutely, and that's a great question, there's absolutely no question in my mind that many of those elongated skulls are the result of artificial head binding with wooden boards by the parents upon birth of the infant, of the child, in order to imitate or mimic the gods with the elongated skulls to show or to praise whoever it was they worship, but they worshiped someone. And having seen some of those skulls up close and actually having handled them, you can tell the difference between a skull, an elongated skull that is of human origin, meaning that you can see that boards, this is the result of artificial, head binding, and you can see the difference between the ones that I think are genuinely of not terrestrial origin, because the ridges are so bizarre on those skulls that they would never have been achieved, or they would have never been formed like that if it had only been for wooden boards. And
the children's skulls, they're 3-4-year-old children, and they've got fully formed teeth like an adult, and in some cases I believe that there's even double rows of teeth. Can you go on a bit about that?
I have not had the opportunity to look at the teeth, but that's very interesting. I've never heard of double row teeth except for stories with giants. But what's also fascinating is that that some of the sutures that we have in our skull, on our brain skull, or our brain box, those sutures do not exist on some of the elongated skulls that I think are not of human origin. And the fact is that bona fide, or normal scientists or doctors are not all over that stuff like a swarm of flies trying to test this stuff. I mean, this should be our number one concern, to have these things tested, and it's not being done.
I got a listener question. I want to go back and ask you about the skulls after this. Forgive me, listener, if I mess up this name. Ed, either Varian or Variant from North Dakota says, any theories as to why no contemporary contacts of open and significant magnitude?
Well, personally, I think it's because I think the great majority of the planet would freak out. Because while today we would not drop down on our knees and start worshiping people in craft, at least I hope that will not be the case. That will not be the case, by the way. But if they were to, show up and show themselves to us like what we see in the movies, then, that's akin to having an intruder in your house. So you have to ask yourself, how do you feel when you have somebody in your house all of a sudden? Well, it's not a good feeling. And with the technological standard that they have, that's what they could do. So because I personally do not think that this whole extraterrestrial question is sinister, I think that we are on our own to actually show them that we are ready for a public visit, because right now this planet is not ready. We are killing ourselves. We are killing and destroying ancient archaeological sites that have been around for thousands of years. I mean, if we are being watched, we are being watched right now. It is as if they're observing a giant anthill, and an anthill is more organized than we are, to be honest.
Yes, it is. And you're absolutely right. We are definitely in a state of chaos. We have a caller, so I guess I'm going to have to yield on my question. Area code 717, welcome to the show. What's your name?
Thanks. This is Lou Sheehan. I've called in before.
That's right, Lou. Do you have any questions for Giorgio?
I do, but it's not going to be quite what he expects, I don't think. Even if, I'm just curious, how many scientific studies are currently underway relating to the plains of Nazca? Even if the scientists don't have the same perspective, it just seems to be whatever perspective they're adopting should be encouraged just with intention.
You're breaking up a little, Lou.
I got the first part of the question, and I can answer to that. So in 2006, 2007, the Erich von Däniken Foundation actually was able to commission archaeologists from the University of Dresden, Germany, to conduct some research on the ground at the plain of Nazca that would explore the questions that we were interested in, and not necessarily, whether or not there are any bones to be excavated and things like that. But what we were interested in is to find out what's with the consistency of the ground, the electric current, because there's a median electric current in the ground, and what we found all throughout the planet with the magnetic field and the Earth's energy, what we found out is that at the beginning and at the end of some of these lines at Nazca, especially the ones that are wide bands that look like runways, and by the way, they never were runways, ever. No, Eric, myself, nor some of my colleagues in the ancient astronaut theory have never proposed that the lines at Nazca were runways. It's ridiculous. It's sand. Any craft would sink in. It's absolutely dumb to suggest that we said that they were runways, which they never were. But at the beginning and at the end of those bands, of those wide lines that look like runways, the ground current, the electric background radiation is 8,000 times higher than the normal background radiation. It's very bizarre stuff. You can put a compass there, and the compass needle would just, go in a circle. And then also we found high amounts of ammonia and nitrous oxides and things like that. I mean, just bizarre stuff. So we published this scientific report in the pages of Legendary Times if anyone is interested.
Oh, okay, and that's in English then?
Yes.
Is that it? Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I have a lung situation at the moment, so my voice can fade in and out. I apologize.
It's okay, Lou, you got another question?
Just very briefly. Even if other scientists don't share the same perspective, are there other scientists doing work there? And it seems to me even they should be encouraged just to bring attention to the whole phenomenon. I'll put it that way.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no. Look, scientists, of course, they're working there. They're excavating. They're doing impeccable work. They're in the heat. They're sweating. They're looking at every shard 100 times. So they're definitely working there. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that, even when you talk to those archaeologists who are working there, they will tell you, if you ask them, well, so who or why was this all made, or what was the purpose?
Right.
And they will say to you, and this is a fact, well, this was all done by the ancient people that lived here on this plain, the Nazcans and the Paracas culture, and they did this in order to worship the gods up in the sky. Well, okay, great. And now what? See, this is where archaeologists go home and they say, case closed, mystery solved.
Right.
Well, not really, because what we are asking is, who were these gods? Because human beings were as lazy 100,000 years ago we are today. So the idea that out of a figment of the imagination, we're going to build these gigantic geoglyphs in the hot desert heat, it's absolutely a ridiculous proposition.
Lou, thank you for calling. And everybody out there calling,
Thanks
please do us a favor and mute your radio before you call in, and wait till your area code's called. Area code 6865. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
My name is Nathan House.
Oh, do you have any questions for Giorgio?
Yes, he was talking about the Nazca lines as far as the magnetic field, how they run along the lines of the Earth. how would this tie in as far as to like what Tesla was tapping into and where did he get his information from?
Well, that's a very great observation and question. Tesla essentially proposed, and he was able to prove it, that the Earth gives off electricity, and that was his whole idea, and that was in fact his invention that somehow, in quotation marks, got lost. And that is that electricity not only is available through the Earth, all around the planet, but it actually emanates, or could emanate, if by installing those different towers that he called Tesla towers, in order to harness the electricity out of thin air. Basically, he invented or proposed that electricity can exist wirelessly like we know the internet today. And if you think about that we could have electricity for free because, let's face it, the Earth is a giant power plant. There's a reason why all of his papers disappeared after he died.
Well, that was because of Westinghouse, correct? They tried to destroy it because they wanted to harness the energy themselves for money, correct?
Well, yeah. Then now we're entering into what could have been and what did happen and so on and so forth. All I'm saying is that Tesla invented free electricity for everyone. How it happened or why it happened, that's not my area of expertise.
Now, do you think that came from kind of what they were tapping into as far as Nazca and the pyramids as well, where they were trying to interconnect together?
Possibly, sure. Look, in one episode of Ancient Aliens, in one of the earlier seasons, we actually proposed that the obelisks in Egypt are energy conductors and things like that. So I would not put it past anyone to suggest that somehow all these things or sites are connected, and if ultimately connected in the right way, maybe they can be powered up. Who knows? This all sounds like science fiction, but we live in an infinite universe, so that means there is infinite possibility.
I appreciate you taking the time for me. I was just curious that, these things run through me quite a bit, and I try to connect the dots. I watch you and I watch Childress, and as far as Eric Von Vanaken, of course. But I appreciate taking the time to answer some of these questions for me.
Well, thanks very much for calling, and I appreciate you being a fan.
More proof that you are truly inspiring so many. And again, this is why I'm proud of you as a Greek, as you are doing us Greeks very, very much proud. Here's an international question. This comes from, I'm going to try to read it properly, Peter from Cambodia. Has he ever investigated or ever seen the ancient 7-step pyramid in Cambodia called Ko Ker? And has he ever linked it to any other ancient race?
I'm not familiar with that particular 7-step pyramid, but I am familiar with Angkor Wat in Cambodia. In fact, it's on my short list of my travel plans. I would love to go to Cambodia, and so when I'm there checking out Angkor Wat, I'll definitely go and check out that 7-step pyramid as well. No question. Angkor Wat is truly amazing, really. And it's also, once again, aligned with the stars as well.
Now, I'm going to go back to what you were saying something earlier when you were talking about the giant heads. I wholeheartedly agree with you that so many parents were binding the skulls of their children to essentially imitate and to thank the gods, as you said, lowercase g, because they are not the creator. They were what we perceived as gods, but yet they were imitating something real. And Akhenaten, a lot of people speculate that he had a giant skull, not from binding, but because he was an actual extraterrestrial. What do you think about that?
Well, not just his head, but also his body. If you look at the representations of Akhenaten, whether it is in carvings or whether it is in a statue or on papyrus or a painting, not only does he have a very weird head with an elongated head, but it's also kind of wide. He has these bizarre cheekbones, these kind of duck-faced lips, and then he has these very bizarre elongated limbs and a pot belly and very thin arms. So, and what's even more bizarre is the fact, and even Egyptologists propose this, that when Akhenaten came to power, he was the first pharaoh to institute, first ruler to institute that his artists had to carve and create everything according to what it looked like in real life. Because if you look at all the other Egyptian carvings and statues of pharaohs and workers and just human beings in general, they're all of exceptional physical prowess. I mean, they're all V-shaped. They're all in they all have abs and they're all in tremendous shape. Well, all of a sudden, in the same sort of vicinity, you have statues and renderings of Akhenaten, and he looks like he looks completely alien compared to all the other ones.
Sunken in chest and a large abdomen, of course.
Right, and so, the Egyptologists are saying that he was the first and last ruler to institute this rule. Well, he claims to have had contact with the sun disk of Ra, with the winged sun disk. Well, what the heck was that? Was it really a disk made of fire with wing? No, it was some type of a craft. And so who knows? And so the idea then is that not only was Akhenaten depicted the way he looked, but because that's what he looked like, he was most certainly not 100% human, but he was hybrid, or he was 100% of extraterrestrial origin.
Johnny's got a question from London. Go ahead, Johnny.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cancel that question.
Okay, no problem. The flood, the great flood, we obviously hear about it in the Bible. From Noah was told to build the ark, the great ark that saved, two animals of every animal. But yet, if you were living in that era several thousand years ago, what you saw at the end of the horizon to you was the entire world. So
yes.
If your region was being flooded, it would seem that the entire world was flooded. But at the same time, we see this flood story appear in multiple texts. Do you think it's the same flood in the same region that was just interpreted in multiple areas, or was there a flood in multiple areas, different times?
Well, this is all an incredibly open topic, and I mean, you've literally opened up the floodgates right now. So, it is such a loaded question, such a complicated question, because Graham Hancock's next book, it's going to come out pretty soon. It's going to be called Magicians of the Gods, and in there he will add fuel to the fire that has been flaming for a very long time now, but it's been a very low flame. It's been a very easy, low, quiet discussion. But the discussion has been that there seems to be evidence that around 10,800 years ago, the Earth was exposed to a giant meteor shower, and millions of people vanished, and millions of people died. So, this is a story that has been, percolating for a while, but it has not yet been 100% accepted by mainstream science, because we know that, or it has been accepted by mainstream science 65 million years ago, a giant dinosaur killer with the asteroid. But the idea is that 10,800 years ago, or 10,800 BC, Earth was exposed to a giant meteor shower with horrific results, and many people died, and that translated into the worldwide flood stories, which all happen to point towards that period of time in our human history. That's what's so fascinating, because, if you go to Pumapunku, which is at an altitude of 12,800 feet, well, the evidence that we have, the way that the stones are laying in the dirt, the way they have been submerged in the soil, leads 100% into the direction that place at one point has been flooded. So we now have two opposite corners of the world. We have South America, and we've got the Near and Far East with flood stories. And all of a sudden you have to wonder, did that stuff really happen worldwide? Some cataclysmic effect or event like a meteor shower, or was it just locally? And I think that now we have to start to shift our thinking, because that also goes back to the destruction of perhaps of Gobekli Tepe.
Yes, and you're absolutely right how it opens up the floodgates, because there are so many questions involving that topic. Here's just a couple of them. For one of them, was it natural as part of Earth's cycle, or was it intentionally done by the extraterrestrials to kill off a certain race? That's one of the questions. And then the other theory that I've heard is not about the cause, but some people, I believe it was John Anthony West, talked about there being water erosion on the Sphinx and so many other things. And those are just two of those topics, let alone underwater structures. For instance, off the coast of Japan, I hear there's some pyramids that are now underwater, which obviously at the time, if they were built, they couldn't have built underwater. They couldn't have been built underwater to begin with. Which of those three do you want to tackle all at once?
Well, let's start with the third one, with the underwater monument in Yonaguni in Japan. It's right off of the island of Okinawa. It's this underwater structure that looks as if platforms have been cut out of the bedrock, because clearly it's a natural formation. It's sort of this hump, sort of this amphitheater type rock formation, but that rock formation clearly has been cut, has been artificially worked on, and so it's underwater. It's 30 feet underwater. Well, how was this done? So you only have two answers to the question, or two solutions, and that is either they had access to scuba gear, which archaeology obviously declares as an impossibility, which is fine. I agree with them. Or number two, this was they manipulated the stone, or they artificially changed that rock formation before, when the water levels worldwide were lower. So this means that we have to go back before the last ice age, which was 14,000 years ago. That precludes mainstream ideas, because according to mainstream ideas, 14,000 years ago, we were nothing. We were just munching on bananas.
Exactly. That's what the mainstream theory says, that we were munching on bananas and barely in the Stone Age, let alone building some of these megalithic structures or have used any of the technology.
Right. So, and unfortunately, fortunately for us, but unfortunately for them, you can't have it both ways. You cannot say a Stone Age person knew about the connection of the pyramid and the numerical pi. You just forget it. It's an impossibility. It's not wishful thinking. It's an impossibility. And so it's those things that we have to finally come to grips, that there are certain things in our history that don't make sense, not because our ancestors were intellectually primitive, but technologically primitive. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with being technologically primitive and receiving help along the way, because all of us, every single human being that has become an adult, is who they are as an adult due to one thing, and that's education. We've all received help along on our way of growing up. We received help starting to speak. We then went to kindergarten. We then went to elementary school, and so on and so forth. forth. We've received help all along as human beings. So the idea that a long time ago, the first basics, the tools for who we are as a species today, that this was imparted to us by extraterrestrials in the remote past as help, that somehow undermines human ingenuity, I do not understand the critics. And you know what? I don't care about them, so whatever.
And they're being outnumbered. They really are, as more people are waking up. When me and you were both in school, we were told that there was no planets outside of our solar system. But yet anybody who's 22 years or younger was in kindergarten after we've discovered these Earth-like planets or planets outside of our solar system. So you're right. They're the people that are debunkers and skeptics, their days are numbered because at some point their narrow-mindedness has to end when presented with evidence. I have a really broad question, so I'm going to try. I really don't know how to ask this. It comes from Pixie. It doesn't give me a state or country or anything. It says, could you ask him about the Watchers? That's all it says. I don't know if you know what that means, or we could bypass it if you don't, but I said I would.
No, but I actually alluded to them or referred to them earlier when I said that, you know, whoever it was that on and off visited us and observed us, because they're observing us, that's why they're called the Watchers. And I don't think that in any way, shape, or form has changed to this day, because if, and this is my opinion, if we are the offspring of a direct genetic targeted mutation of our genes that was directed and performed by humanoid or human-like extraterrestrials, and we are sort of, you know, we were, quote-unquote, created in their image, as some of the ancient texts are saying, then, you know, I think that that this whole idea of the Watchers has remained with us to this day, because if we are, you know, their children, so to speak, then I don't think that we were completely abandoned throughout, you know, the last 5,000 years. I don't think that they were here 5,000 years ago and then they disappeared and boom, they were back in 1947 with Roswell. I don't think that is the case. I think that we have been on a watch list for the past, you know, at least 100 to 200,000 years, because who knows what was up with our human ancestors? How far did they make it? You know, what happened to them? I mean, we now know as a scientific fact that some of our human ancestors and Homo sapiens, we all lived together. So why did we survive? What made us so special? You know, because our brain certainly wasn't the biggest. It changed over time. The volume actually tripled. So what was going on? So it's all a giant question mark.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because a lot of the mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists say that Homo sapiens evolved from Homo erectus and Neanderthal. But yes, as you allured to, there was a period of time where we, Homo sapiens, were living side by side on the same continent of Africa with Neanderthal.
Well, and not just in Africa, also in Europe.
And that blew my mind away, that the fact that they were doing that, yet we've been taught all our lives that no, that can't be right, since they died off long before we ever came to be. So that was just more proof to me that the science needs to be corrected. As fast as we write it, it gets rewritten.
Well, and you know, and that's what's so cool about the whole idea of our ancient texts, because many archaeologists would have us believe that what we read about in the ancient texts, that we should not take it, you know, literally. And no, you know, no kidding. Of course, we shouldn't take it literally. But at the same time, you see, what's so fascinating is that when you have a couple of text passages, and one text passage talks about that, you know, there was a square full of people, and they were waiting for their teacher to arrive so that they could have their next lesson in, you know, learning. And then, and this paragraph is considered to be okay, and apparently reporting the truth. And then in the next paragraph, it says and of course, and this is hypothetical. This text does not exist in the form that I'm giving it, of course, but I have to disclose this, otherwise people are saying, oh, now he's just, pulling things out of thin air. Yes, I am mentioning this as an example. And then in the second paragraph, it says, oh, and then their teacher arrived. He descended from the sky on a fiery shield that was glowing orange like a furnace. And then, he was instructing them, and then he would disappear again into the sky. Well, all the stuff that takes place on Earth, or that, is earthbound by archaeologists, is considered to be truth, and everything else that happens in between those stories of somebody descending from the sky or somebody taking off into the sky with a chariot, all that all of a sudden is fantasy. Why? Why can't it be that our ancestors actually had better things to do than to write down fantasy stories? Because at the time when writing was first invented, man, we were survivalists. We had to figure out shelter and food. We were concerned about survival and not with let's sit around a campfire and get drunk and write up stories. I think we had more important things to think about than to invent fantasy stories.
I wholeheartely agree in so many ways. If writing was so scarce and so few people were literate, why would they waste it on fantasy stories when they could record history, which is exactly what I believe they did. They recorded it.
And here's the thing, obviously over time things got added to the stories and legends got embellished or things got embellished. That's why we have legends. That's why we have mythologies. But that is not the reason why we're asking the questions. The questions I'm asking or I'm curious about is what was there at the beginning of that legend? Because we all know every mythology, every legend has a core that is the truth, and we are after this truth. And in most cases, as we now know, the truth is more fantastical than we can ever imagine.
That's right. Truth is stranger than fiction, and the more we look, what used to sound way bizarre is actually, we have to accept it because that's what the evidence is pointing to. We have under 15 minutes left, closer to 13, and I got these are very broad questions and are probably going to be difficult for you because they'd be akin to asking what your favorite child is out of a group of 12 children. The first one is, out of all the sites you visited across the world, what were the most astonishing and why?
Well, I sound like a broken record, but I always have to go back to Tiwanaku in Bolivia or Pumapunku, which is the same place, because you will find stone blocks there that are ancient, made out of andesite, that we today would have great difficulty replicating. We can replicate them, but we would use sophisticated cutting technology. And I have no idea how people 5,000 years ago, or even, let's say, if we believe Wikipedia, even if Wikipedia is true, how they did this, let's say, 1,000 years ago. Even 1,000 years ago, you cannot cut andesite, which is the igneous rock, with a copper or a stone tool. Can't do it, period.
Here's another written question before I ask the other broad, hard, difficult question. This is from Pixie again, does he think on the verge of a shift and unlocking the 5D, I'm assuming, dimension?
I don't know anything about dimensions, but I do think that we are definitely experiencing a shift. It's what they refer to sometimes as this paradigm shift, or this shift in the zeitgeist, because a lot of people are asking me, when do I think disclosure is going to happen? And that's sort of the same question. And I think that disclosure is something, and I've said this many times before, the disclosure event that we're waiting for, a press conference, and the president of the United States announces that there's ET life or something like that. That, in my opinion, will never come. Disclosure, I think we are in it. Disclosure is a process. It's a long process, and if you go to the movies right now, all those movies are about extraterrestrial life in the remote past and their interaction with mankind and how, we're all part of a bigger picture. TV shows, Ancient Aliens, these are all questions that we have as mankind, and I think the fact that all this stuff is on the air is, in my opinion, a way to prepare the masses with the idea, hey, think about it. Not only are we not alone, but they're here and they're friendly. They're okay. Because otherwise, man, we would already be gone. If they wanted us gone, it would be over. So this whole thing that we can fight them and blah blah blah, and we got to watch out, and we can take them if they come to us. No, we can't. There's nothing we can do anyway. So we might as well enjoy it and be friendly.
You're absolutely right. If it had been a scenario out of Independence Day, we would be gone. Like you said, there's just no if, and, or buts. If they have the technology to get here, how easy would it be for them to obliterate us? So you're right. We have to take it as it is and be friendly. And I've always been saying this. People can't be passive and wait for POTUS to tell us that, hey, by the way, just so you know, that we've been visited and we've been keeping it quiet about it. No. Disclosure is in everybody's hands. Everybody out there has to be proactive. By watching Ancient Aliens, by watching In Search of Aliens, by reading Legendary Times and spreading the word, people are actually making a difference. Now here goes the other children-like question of Best Children. Of all the episodes you filmed, it's going to be, again, really difficult because there were so many fascinating. I couldn't even list you my favorite ones because there's way too many. Which ones stick out in your head more than others when you look back in the history of what you've done for History Channel?
I especially love Season 1 of Ancient Aliens, and my favorite episode in Season 1 is called The Evidence, which I think is episode number 1. So Season 1, Episode 1 is my favorite episode. And then I got to say, the pilot that we did, God's Chariots and Beyond, which it is now called, which was the first Ancient Aliens episode that we ever did, the first 2-hour special, I thought that was quite amazing. And then, every season there are a couple of shows that for example, in Season 3, or maybe it was in Season 4, Human Origins or something like this, where we in detail explore the idea that there are certain things in our genetic makeup that are absolutely unique in all of the animal kingdom, and it's the reason why we're intelligent, but nobody can figure out how this gene, where did we get it from? And so there's this big debate going on now between the evolutionists and the intelligent design people, because in a weird way, they're both right, but they're both wrong, because the Darwinists they know that there's this missing link that nobody can figure out what it was, and the intelligent design people, they say, well, that missing link, which is the whole idea about coincidence and survival of the fittest, it's not really coincidence, it's an exterior force. It was God, it was the universe. Well, both sides are wrong and both sides are right, so they should meet in the middle, because the missing link is neither. The missing link is an extraterrestrial force that changed our genetic makeup in a lab, and it was done in a very, very simple way, that we are doing it ourselves in a lab. It has nothing to do with esoterics or any spirituality or any some such nonsense. It was very straightforward. They saw the potential in our species, and they said, these guys can bring it far. They can shine throughout the universe, and let's give them the tools. And here we are. We screwed it all up instead of doing something magnificent with it.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that we screwed it up. And I always look back at the example of the Manhattan Project. We figured out a way how to split the atom and cause an atomic detonation, or detonate an atomic bomb. And what's the first thing we do? Rather than building a power plant or finding a good use for it, we figure out a way to obliterate an entire city. And we did two of them, in fact. Not to mention all the other countless tests we've done, like Bikini Atoll, where we literally made it uninhabitable inhabitable. But you're right. We definitely screwed it up. And it was just science. It wasn't esoteric or spiritual. It's exactly what we're currently doing now. I've actually heard that they've regenerated and cloned some Neanderthal organs. I think it's just a matter of time before we go one step further and are able to create other things. We got a little over 5 minutes left, so I'm going to get a couple more in for you. And then, of course, I want to ask you whatever you want to tell the people out there. Lost cities, Atlantis, for example. People talked about it having a group of intelligent people, amazing architecture, a very rich city, and then it just disappeared. High Brazil, another one known as the Celtic Atlantis, that all of a sudden in the 18th century just disappeared off the face of this earth. What's your thoughts on these ancient cities that existed and then all of a sudden disappeared?
Yeah, sure. No, that's actually a long-standing favorite topic of mine, especially as it relates to islands that not only appear but then disappear. In fact, the same can be said about Atlantis, because in this day and age, there's not a single topic out of which more books have been written in Atlantis. I think it's like 10 or 12,000 books have been written so far, which is a staggering amount. But what's so fascinating is that whenever those different books discuss the disappearance of Atlantis, when you read the Greek original, in the ancient Greek, it never says, Plato never says that Atlantis sank. He always says Atlantis vanished or disappeared. And there lies a big difference, because he also describes how Atlantis disappeared. And he said there was a giant pillar of fire and a lot of smoke, and the outside perimeter of the island was gleaming like shining bronze. Now, if you describe that and then you have something that disappears in a pillar or a cloud of smoke, well, did that island or whatever it was actually sink, or did it actually perhaps take off? So the reason I'm saying this is because in ancient Greek mythology, there's a story of the Asteria. Asteria, as you know, Dr. J, means stars. But the Asteria in the mythology, the section I'm referring to, are even more amazing. They would land, or they would shoot from the sky into the sea, but they wouldn't sink. They would turn themselves into navigable islands. And they had the power of the gods, so to speak, to drive all around the Greek islands, and then at the end of their missions or whatever, they would then disappear back into the sky. So are we talking about craft here? And I think the answer is yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly what comes to my mind. Instead of being a giant island or anything along the lines of that, because you're right, he does not say it sunk, it vanished. And to me, you took the words right out of my mind, that I thought it was a giant craft. And I think the same thing with High Brazil, because had it sunk, and yet we knew about it, why haven't we been able to find it on the bottom of the ocean, even though millions and millions of dollars have been spent scouring the oceans to find it, everywhere from people believing it near the Bahamas to near Greece, all over the place. Here's one more written question, and then we're coming down.
Just to add, just to add to this one, and this is exactly right what you're saying, because with today's radar technology, with Google Earth and everything, we've already mapped the bottom of our oceans. There are all these weird anomalies that we found, but not a single one of these anomalies merits the explanation that this is where Atlantis, or for that matter, Lemuria or Mu or any of those enchanted places, those long lost islands, that they have been there at some point and then sank. The geological evidence is not there. So what remains? It had to have been something else.
Exactly. And one thing you mentioned earlier, that POTUS, I don't think POTUS is going to disclose anything, that it's up to everybody. I've always thought that instead of the military having things, that everything might be in private corporations. Briefly, do you think that's possibly the case with regards to actual alien relics?
I'm not sure about alien relics, but what I definitely am sure about is that I welcome the privatization of space exploration, because I think while the government can help us in, with the facilities and with, because you need the giant launch pads and things like that, I think it should be a collaboration between NASA and private companies, and I think that's the direction we're headed in. And I think the future is very bright at the moment with manned exploration. And I think that, this is also what sets us apart from the animal kingdom. We are the only animal species out there that is curious to trying to figure out, what's beyond the stars. I mean, what other animal does that? And that's what makes us so special.
Exactly. Giorgio Tsoukalos, it has been an honor to have you on the show. Please stick around afterwards real quick to briefly thank you off air. But I wanted to ask you in 20 seconds or less, if you have one message for everybody out there listening, what would you have to say to everybody?
Just be nice to each other. There's too much, the underbelly of society is being shown right now on social media. And there's things that you would never say to someone, to their faces, if it weren't for a computer screen. So think next time you write something online, think how you treat one another, and just be nice to each other. That's all.
That's right. I have to agree with that. Love is the key. Remember, treat others as you would have them treat unto you. And don't forget Contact in the Desert. Next week's guest, Peter Lavende, joining us on Tuesday. Thursday is a double episode. First with Robert Morningstar in hour 2, Eric Von Doniken. That's right. Back by popular demand. You guys asked for him. Speaking of Contact in the Desert, well, he's going to be on air right before we kick off the event. Again, contactinthedesert.com for more info. You'll see me. You'll see everybody else there that we spoke about. And, of course, our guest tonight, Giorgio Tsoukalos. This is Dr. J, Dr. J Radio Live, signing out.